response video to the Modern Mystic on economics. I think I'll just post it on the inmendham channel for the hell of it. I could, put it on the economics channel, but who cares? It's always economics, so run away or whatever. Man, it's Nick, the Modern Mystic. Yay! So I was feeling a little down because it didn't seem to be very interactive, and I like Nick. I miss him. Anyway. So we have agreed all the way up to this part, which is very nice. Oh, this agreement is great. What the Fed is, what it does, agreement. So this is the part where he's doing the whoa, whoa, whoa thing. So let's play a little bit of it and we'll...
Ooh. We've gone into fantasy land here. The government every now and then would put money in the bank's reserve accounts, so extra cash could be put into the economy. No, it's just completely and utterly wrong.
Well, to say it's completely and utterly wrong, I think it's just, that's kind of silly. We obviously went from 1980, where there was $300 billion in circulation, cash in circulation, to $1.2 trillion now. And that number hasn't changed in the last 5 years, I think, 1.2. So obviously we went from 300 billion to 1.2 trillion. Now we did that. It's a fact. That happened. That's at the Fed site. They'll tell you that happened. So somehow, Federal Reserve, somehow Treasury money got printed. Cash got printed and is in circulation as cash. Cash got diluted from $300 billion of tokens, little round things, whatever, gambling chips, to 1.2 trillion gambling chips. That happened. And that doesn't count what's in the reserve accounts, obviously, because there's $5 trillion in the reserve accounts. It only counts the money in circulation. So to say it's utterly wrong, all right, maybe I didn't say it right, but it's not utterly wrong. And I did make a follow-up video where I explained that the government has, in the past, bought treasuries with Federal Reserve money that the banks did take out, that we essentially bought crap, gave the banks, we had the banks buy crap, we put the money in the reserve accounts, and the banks took the money. Unlike the reserve accounts now, where they didn't take the money. They took the money out of the reserve accounts to buy the crap that we bought, and we never resold the crap. But anyway, early wrong is just not going to work as a response.
Just wrong, to the extent, if you can find anyone on the planet that also says that that's what happens, I'd be interested to know.
Okay, well, if you can find any economic person on the planet who claims we didn't go from $300 billion in circulation to $1.2 trillion in circulation, and we did it through some mechanism that involved the Federal Reserve, if you can find one who says that that's not how it happens, I would be interested. Okay, no. We'll play along and hopefully things aren't, hopefully this isn't a train wreck video, but we'll see. The title Daddy is Wrong. I can't glean much from that. But anyway, till next time. Okay, correlation does not mean correlation. Causation does not mean correlation does not mean causation. So there's two connected things that happened. We went from $300 billion in circulation to $1.2 trillion in circulation, and over the same period of time we had a commensurate inflation of prices. So just by the same amount our money devalued, 300 billion to 1.2 trillion, the price of things like a car, went from 5,000 to 25,000, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so let's hear what his argument is.
Between 1980, well, I'll say could be. This is one of these classic correlation does not mean causation things. Just because the amount of cash in circulation, and we've got to take in where, for the amount America, it's very important for the dollar. I think even most dollars are actually out of the United States. They're not actually used in the United States. But just because the number from 1980 to now happens to equate to roughly what the inflation number is, that's a correlation, but there's no causation.
Well, you're saying there's no causation, but again, let's just, we both agree that economics people are full of crap. Okay, they've been lying forever, and, they're certainly lying about bank practice. That first the deposit goes in and then the loan goes out. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. Certainly everybody's been lying about, Volcker and whatever his fucking name was forever there at the Fed and all these people. They've been lying forever about how the economy really works, which is rich people get richer when we deficit spend. It makes rich people richer, so they feign some sort of, ooh, there's a deficit. And they know that as soon as they create a deficit, rich people are going to own the deficit. They're going to get wealthier by owning it. And it's only going to hurt poor people. It's only going to hurt the working class to run deficits. And so the big lie. So there's all these tons of big lies. And so you can't you're saying emphatically there's no correlation. I'm saying this is about as obvious as it could get. All right, you want to know why Van Goghs got more expensive? It's because rich people got more rich, right? Well, what I'm saying is the inflation and the correlation between how much cash is in circulation and how much value your cash has, your dollar, seems to me a pretty close. It seems if you were going to sit there and take a first guess at what would be the most important thing, how much cash you've actually printed, you could argue that that's probably the most important thing. So if you were to say there's no correlation, I'm saying it's not a coincidence that those two numbers are trailing each other. Inflation is following the cash. As the cash gets printed, after a couple of years, inflation catches up. And the reason why we've had no inflation for the last 5 or 6 years is because they haven't printed any cash, because they've locked it all the printed cash is locked up in the Fed, in the reserve accounts. Alright, we are dragging on here a little bit, so he keeps saying there's no correlation, but he doesn't give a reason. Now he's going to start giving a reason, so we'll play with this a little bit. Sorry, I just really didn't want to have to do this many cut-ins. But
it doesn't make sense at all. Cash. What you're saying is that the amount of cash out there should be closely correlated with the amount of inflation. No, it doesn't. Why should it?
All right, that's just the simple island logic. You can go back to the island again, and you can say if you create money to make transactions, okay, so you just make the money and you give it to the people, and now they can have transactions. And then then things are going fine. There are people using their money. And then all of a sudden you just show up and just say, let's double the amount of money. I'll show up. I'll just spend, as much money as this is in circulation. We know what's going to happen. There's going to be inflation. The value of everybody else's money goes down. As I put more money in, the value of everybody else's money goes down. It's the painting argument. It's widget argument. It doesn't matter what it is. If you equate twice as much supply of anything produced on Earth right now, steel, oil, anything, if you produce twice as much of it, you will devalue what is out there by half. That's just logic. You're telling me if some company makes 5 billion iPhones, that the price of iPhones aren't going to be cut in half? Yeah, they're going to be cut in half. It's just going to happen. That is logical. I'm sorry you don't think it's logical, but that's fucking logical. Anyway, here's this explanation.
I've got two ways of looking at this. I might go into the other one later, but just think about it normally. How many cash transactions are done compared to the amount of transactions that are done?
Okay, well, you answered that question before when you said the Fed does $5 trillion worth of cash transactions a day. $5 trillion worth of cash transactions. It's cash in the sense that the check is a claim on cash. The thing is denominated in cash. Somewhere the cash is the root of the value. It is the standard. The cash is the standard. It's just as if we had a gold standard and somebody discovered twice as, they found a huge gold mine, and all of a sudden there was twice as much gold, then the value of currency would be half as valuable. We would have 50% inflation or 100% inflation. That would happen in the real world if we had a gold standard. We'd be completely subject to what the market is. And if you put twice as much corn on the market, the price of corn is going to go down.
Let's say that AOL buys Time Warner. I'm just thinking that's a monster thing. That was, whatever it was, 20 billion, I can't remember. A big company buys another big company. No cash.
Right, it doesn't have anything to do with cash, right? Because nothing really happened. I mean, nothing really happened, right? But if two companies merge, nothing really happens except some employees are fired. But beyond that, this rich people own stock. Rich people own stock before, rich people own stock after. And pretty much the same as what they owned before, right? I mean, you could argue that one company goes down a little, one company goes up a little. But in the end, it's the same. Rich people owning the same stock. It's just that now they're calling themselves one company. It's the same thing as the two companies. So it doesn't really matter when somebody buys somebody. Nothing really got bought. Nothing really got exchanged. And again, that has nothing to do with cash creation. Transactions don't create cash. The Fed creates cash. Well, anyway. I'll play a little bit, see if he says something else.
The entire stock market, all the stocks and shares bought and sold in Apple, no cash.
Again, those aren't claims on cash in any kind of direct way. Those are claims on crap, on optimism. They're claims on a resource that doesn't really exist. They're claims on future labor, future productivity, future all kinds of crap. All that crap can evaporate in 10 minutes. So all that stock market isn't any real cash in that stock market. There's just promissory notes written on cash. Again, every note, every check, every debt, everything is denominated in cash. But the cash has to have value. The cash is gold. So just think of cash as a gold standard and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Then you'll understand that if I double the amount of gold, I'm going to devalue the cash. And everything else is a claim on cash. It's a claim on, obviously it's not a claim on the amount of cash in circulation. It's a claim on the promise of the government that the contract is good and the cash is used to monetize that. And it's a fact that how liquid the cash is decides its value. How to say this? It's the difference between collateralized debt and uncollateralized debt. But I don't want to make this whole argument about the difference, but there's a huge difference. And cash means something. Well, I'll just go back to the gold standard thing. Just think of cash as gold, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. If we had a gold-denominated monetary system, like a piece of 8, then you'll understand how many pieces of 8 you put into circulation will change the value of everything you're buying. It will devalue the goods. It will devalue the cash. Sorry, I said it the wrong way. Okay. Until next time. Alright, this isn't going very well. Okay, so I have to play this part because you're entirely wrong.
The amount of cash that's out there, it's got no correlation to inflation, and there is absolutely no reason it should have, because nobody knows how much cash there is out there. You do, because you've got a particular bug up your arse about...
Well, I think people do know, okay, and it is on the Fed's site, so it's there to see. And the difference between 1980 and now is there to see. The chart is there to see. And again, I think the logical argument that if we were making our transactions and we had promissory notes written in doubloons, Okay, how many doubloons this is worth. This stock is worth 50 doubloons. And all of a sudden I showed up, okay, with as much doubloons that were in circulation. And I showed up with that many more doubloons from Mars. I came from Mars, I come to Earth, and I got as many doubloons as already in circulation, and I spend them all into the economy. The fact is, alright, that that's going to inflate the value of everything you purchase. The value of everything will go up because I'm going to be bidding like crap on everything, alright, and the value of the currency, the doubloons, is going to go down, alright. That's inflation. That's what's going to happen. So if a Martians show up and they have $1.2 trillion in cash and they spend it in our economy, I'll tell you, 1.2 trillion of new cash spent into the economy will create inflation. It will. It has to be borrowed money. Borrowed money isn't cash. Borrowed money isn't cash. An IOU is not cash. A federal government IOU is cash. Everything else isn't. Federal government IOU. I mean, you have to separate the difference between bonds and cash. Cash are cash is a note accepted at face value. Bonds are accepted as a promise of that face value. That's all they are. They're again, and we both know, you know, I know, that bonds have no value once inflation is let loose. Bonds are ludicrously bad investments really quick if there's any kind of inflation. Heavy inflation. So anyway, and the point is that's why the cash is in the Federal Reserve, is because if it goes into the economy, it ticks up that $1.2 trillion number. Then the Martian money gets released. The Martian money now was just trapped in buying a bunch of debt, okay? And it bought it with invisible digits invented by banks. And so the banks still have the liability. They just don't need the cash yet because they're not being forced to balance their books. But if they had to balance their books tomorrow, they'd have $5 trillion of expenditures into the economy, and they'd have no money to balance that book with. Nothing of any value anyway. Well, they'd have the assets the government bought. They'd have the debt, but obviously you can't resell that debt into this market because, you know, there's nobody's going to buy it. No one's going to buy your bond when there's every prospect that you're going to have to print cash in the future to pay your bills. Why would I buy a bond that's going to pay me $100, let's say a $100 bond today, it's going to pay me $100 a year from now if I know a bunch of cash is going to be released into the economy? I'm going to know that I'm not getting $100 back. I mean, yes, it'll say $100, but it won't be $100 of purchasing power. All right, this went on longer than I wanted to. Sorry about that. Okay. I'll try to resist. Oh, I should have got to where he plays and nobody else does. You could walk, is what he's saying here,
for 1,000 miles around your area and speak to everybody, and you won't find one other person that knows how much cash there is out there in circulation. So how's anybody meant to know? But more importantly, the amount of cash transactions done are so minimal, how can it have an effect on inflation?
Because the transactions are denominated in that cash. Because it's the standard. I don't know how else to say it. Cash is the standard. If the standard goes to shit, all those transactions will go to shit too. Okay. Yeah, I've really said it. Alright. I really am going to be able to do this. So then he's saying, think of, he's being a little patronizing and, telling me I'm a religious nut and all this other stuff with this cash idea. And we've had this conflict over cash before. And I'm just still stuck here saying, I don't know how you can't, how can you not get it? And you're doing the same thing to me. Fine, okay, I get that. So now he said again, think about all the transactions that take place and there's no cash. They're all denominated in cash. And again, as you stated, all of those transactions end up in the Fed. All right? They're all exchanged in Federal Reserve notes. So all the checks are cashed in Federal Reserve notes, in Federal Reserve account balances, okay, in what used to be, okay, as good as cash, in the sense that the reserve accounts, as you know, 10 years ago, there was $40 billion in the reserve accounts, and there's now $5 trillion in the reserve accounts. So obviously what was in the reserve accounts used to be pretty much cash. And now what's in the reserve accounts is still pretty much cash, but it's not in circulation. And that's the key. And that's why the money's there. And that's why it's not being loaned out. And that's why it's not being invested in the stock market. That's why the banks aren't buying stuff with all their money. Is because that money's already been spent. And it can't be spent again because then it's liberated into the economy. Alright, how else to say this? So I'll just keep going back to that. All of the cash, all of the checks, all of the fake money is transacted by the Fed in real cash between the banks. And the only thing stopping it to being real cash is they won't allow it to leave the Federal Reserve. If it leaves the Federal Reserve, then it's real cash, and that's when inflation starts. Alright, I think I've done it. Let's see if he mocks me some more.
United States. So how can your silly little cash thing have so much effect on inflation? It can't.
It is the cornerstone of economic vitality, having a currency that isn't crap. If you print it, your currency is crap and it will devalue. That's why you need 678 million yen to buy, I don't know, one of those umbrellas you put in a drink. That's why. It's because they printed them. Yeah. Alright, anyway. Till next time. Okay, so he said a part where I think he's going to say something. So he's at least agreed on me on the Fed, the fact that it's the bankers' money, technically, blah, 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 blah. But he calls me a religious person by having this perception that cash is very important. The integrity of the cash is important. And the government can't just print it. If it prints cash to pay the bills, like say it didn't borrow money, it didn't issue bonds anymore, it just printed the cash. You're saying it wouldn't matter. I'm saying it would create hyperinflation. If the government printed $3 extra trillion to balance the, to pay the bills and not borrow any money, just to say it's not going to issue any bonds. So you're talking about $2 trillion, I think, is what we're running deficit. We're technically running $1 trillion real bond deficit, and then we do the fake, buy stuff off the market stuff for another $1 trillion. That's the game they've been playing. But anyway, let's just say I spent $1 trillion. The government of the United States of America prints $1 trillion in cash and pays it in Social Security or something. Doesn't get revenue in, doesn't borrow the money, just prints solid cash. And now there's $2.2 trillion in circulation. I'm saying that's guaranteed to create inflation. Guaranteed. Big inflation. And he's calling that a religious theory. Now, I don't think it's anywhere close to a religious theory. I say, I'd love to be able to do the experiment. Just say, see, I told you so. 1.2 or 2.2. It matters how much money is in circulation. It matters how much you print.
Will run into trouble because money is not like this. Money is an accounting procedure. And if you're thinking about money as a thing, this is money, and they're here and there, and it gets transferred around as a one individual thing.
That's what it does. That's right. And again, back to the Federal Reserve. That's what the Federal Reserve does every day. Is it takes all of those fake little digits going flying all over the place, all those checks, all those electronic checks, and it cashes them. Okay, and then it does all of that cashing, and then in the reserve accounts it gives Bank A 50 billion or 50 million, and it gives Bank B this, and it takes it from this guy and gives it to that guy, and it gives and takes real cash from the banks every day. It takes real cash from a bank and it gives some other bank real cash every day. Real cash, not checks, not bullshit, real reserve account cash.
You're going to run into trouble, and this is one of the reasons you're running into trouble here, because you're thinking about it as a one thing. Just picked up another one. Money is not, and money is a dreadful name for it, because people are so confused in their lives about what money is. They basically don't know.
Well, we agree on that. We agree that people are okay. This is like me. I disagree with you on nihilism or something. Okay, yeah, we get the atheism thing right, but we have different theories about what it means to be atheist, what it means to look at the world and analyze it and find out what it means. So we're both agreeing that yes, the common bank practice, common idiot knowledge of the world, yes, the idiots don't know what's going on. They've got it wrong for sure. I can even say that about physics, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm right. But I'm sure as fuck they're wrong. Space makes the nothing makes the something do something? I don't think so.
Accounting procedure, and it always comes in twos. It's somebody's asset and somebody's liability, and then when it's transferred, it goes like this and then it goes like this, and if it goes to the Fed to make it go vertical, it's the bank's, say, asset and the Fed's liability, like you're talking about now.
I understood, but again, I've tried to explain this, is pointing out how you would create a cash economy in the first place, and the way you would do it, honestly, is you would create a bank, a cash bank, and you have a bunch of cash, and now you say you have to pay your taxes in this cash, these doubloons, and so you got to come to me, okay, to buy yourself some doubloons, and you bring your barter goods, you bring me your crops or your house mortgage or your car or something you've leased or something you've borrowed or something you own, and you give me an IOU on that thing, all right? You mortgage it for me to give you. You make a debt note, an IOU note, and I'll give you the doubloons, and I'll keep the collateral. And that's how you would create cash. Cash would always have collateral. It would always have ownership tied right to it. It wouldn't go out unless something came in, and then it would come back in and the stuff could go back out. So somebody could go into the world and they could have an economy and they could make some extra cash, and then they could go buy their stuff out of debt. But it would be like a pawn shop. That's how cash would be created, is you'd have a pawn ticket that was actual money. But it would be based on something. And as soon as it's based on nothing, and as soon as you just print it and buy stuff to put in your bank, that's not going to work. That's going to break the game. That's going to inflate the value of everything. If I inject fake cash tickets into the economy, I will create inflation.
Banks have an account at the Fed. The Fed is liable to pay the banks the money that they have at the Fed. It is a liability for the Fed. It is a credit for the banks. If you don't...
Well, understood, but again, we know what they did with that why the Federal Reserve money is theirs, because the Fed had the banks buy for them, and that's how it happened. The banks bought it for them. All right? $5 trillion worth of junk. And that's what we own. We own stupid bonds. We own a bunch of crap that we can't resell because no one's stupid enough to buy it. But that's what we own. And it's not all crap. Like I said, maybe we can get maybe we can get $3 trillion back on it. But as soon as we try to get the money back on it, the stock market's going right down into the toilet. And that's why the purchases are all about making the rich richer. They're not about making anybody else anything. It just makes the rich richer. And when they sell that shit, it's going to make the rich poorer.
Think about things in twos. You will somewhere along the line, or often a long way, many places along the line, get into trouble. Getting into trouble.
Okay, well, whatever. Insult, triviality. You're silly. You're whatever. You're wearing a tutu and talking nonsense. Blah, 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 blah. All right. Yeah, sorry. Just shower hair now. Pool hair, now shower hair. So we just agreed on a lot of stuff. That was good. He keeps saying this, nobody knows how much money there is. So he says, you know, they know how many bonds there are, they know how many other things, but somehow they don't know how much money there is. I'm going to argue that currency traders know that 1.2 number. They're looking every day to see what those reserve accounts are doing and whether somebody's going to start leaking money out of those reserve accounts. Every day. They're keenly interested in watching that reserve money. But anyway, that aside. So now we're on the subject of what happens when you do this $5 trillion of purchases off of the rich man market. And if you take a bunch of stuff, you know, I use the example of Rolls Royces, but if I take a bunch of Rolls Royces off the market, I buy them off the market, the Rolls Royces that are left are going to go up in value. So he's agreeing that people who get this money from the Fed, essentially, in the sense that we bought stuff off the market, that the people who got the cash, got money for it, for the stuff they owned, spend that cash in the stock market. And that's why the stock market goes up, is because QE is basically save the stock market. That's what it is. All right, that's its most direct influence, is make commodity and equity prices go up. And that's what it will do. And that's what it did. $5 trillion worth of new money put into the market because $5 trillion worth of assets were taken off the market. Okay, so he agrees with that. Now the part he doesn't understand, or doesn't agree with, is that it's the bankers' money, the bankers who created the deposits after they purchased from some rich guy his bond. So a rich guy owned the bond, the bankers bought the bond by giving the rich guy the money out of their digits. And that the money in the Federal Reserve account is basically the government providing the collateral for those digits. That's why the digits have to stay bank digits. That's why the bank digits can't be released. That's why the money is in the reserve account. It's going to stay in the reserve account. Is this very reason, okay, that if you release it, if you let the banks just do the transaction, complete the transaction, and that we actually own the bond, then the cash has to get released because it's printed, bought. All those purchases were made with nobody's money. They were made, the purchases were made with bank digits. And those bank digits have a tie directly to a liability of the bank, $5 trillion in liability that bankers have. They made $5 trillion worth of deposits that they have to be accountable for. And the accountable for is the reserve account money. That's the collateral for the loan. And that's why we're paying the bank's interest. Because it's just a loan. Technically. Entirely.
Wow. Hang on, secured loan. No, that's bollocks. Unless you can explain to me what you're talking about there. No, that's you've followed it right. That the Treasury went to the Fed. As this jumping of pairs went, the client that owned the Treasury in the first place has a deposit, an extra bit into their deposit account. The bank has reserves at the Fed, which is the equivalent of a deposit account for the client. It's a deposit account at the Fed. That's all. There's no loan being made at all. It's,
Well, I mean, technically that's a loan, isn't it? If the bank would just take possession of their money, if it was their money, right? If they were making the purchase for us and they were just being a true agent makes the purchase. You pay the agent for the thing you bought, and then you get the thing you bought. But that's not what happened, all right? I mean, we don't have real possession of that stuff. We have, because the money stayed in the reserve accounts. If the money leaves the reserve accounts, then yeah, we have real possession. But until we really pay for it, we don't have real possession. The banks have $5 trillion in liability. The Federal Reserve money is created printed money. All right, it was not put there through tax revenues. It was not put there through issuing bonds. It was just plain printed digits. The Federal Reserve accounts represent printed digits. And if the banks take them, okay, as if they're regular bank assets, then shit happens. All kinds of all shit hits every kind of fan there is. If there's anything that has anything like a propeller on it, shit is going to hit it.
purchases every time. Swapping of asset to liability. No loan at all.
Well, again, I technically I'd say it's obviously it's a loan. We've basically collateralized the bank digits that bought the bonds and that bought the securities technically, right? We actually bought securities. We bought junk from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and we resold it with a FDIC insured guarantee, and it's absolute fucking shit. It should just say on it, absolute fucking shit. But it's FDIC insured, because you can't let anybody go bankrupt. Because as soon as the run on the bankruptcy court happens, that's when it all tumbles down. So when you see those bankruptcy numbers start going up, that's when you start getting nervous, because that's going to be the cascade. Once that number gets out of control, once that thing gets any momentum, that's when everything falls apart. Because all this is crap money. All this wealth is bullshit. Okay. I'll be back. Alright, I'm going to cut in here anyway. So he says something about it's not mature. This is a mature world. So he's talking about now the agreement. I'm saying there's a, what is it? Poke, poke, nudge, nudge. Say no more, say no more. You know, Monty Python, whatever it is. Nudge, nudge. Something nudge, nudge. Jab, jab, nudge, nudge. I don't know what it is. But anyway. There's a deal between the Fed and the banks. Okay, there is a lawyers involved. I'm sure there's contracts written. Look, the $5 trillion has nothing to do with the banks anyway, right? It has to do with like Citibank and whatever, jerky ass, right? It's 3 banks, let's say, that have all of that $5 trillion. You know, the 4 point. There's only 40 billion still of real reserves in the Federal Reserve. Real bank reserves. The 99%, 95% of the money is printed cash that the government put in the reserve accounts. Let's not forget where it came from. It's printed money. It's not real money. It's not federal revenues. It's not real money. It's printed money put in the Federal Reserve accounts. Purely printed. And I'm telling you, you can say it's a fantasy, you can say it's religion. I'm telling you, if we could go look, all right, there's no way the Fed is going to let the banks take that money out. No way. And you know they would want to. If the banks really had $5 trillion sitting in reserve accounts, you goddamn know they wouldn't be taking 0.25% interest on it when they could be buying Apple stock. I mean, get serious. $5 trillion. They could buy whole sections of Europe with that and enslave them to some capitalist scheme. You don't think the bankers want their $5 trillion? No. Yes, of course they want it. They can't fucking have it. They have to sell the assets to get the money. There's no getting the money from the reserves without selling an asset. The only way those reserve numbers are going down is they have to sell the shit they bought. Period. I guarantee it. So yeah, come on. So I mean, I know there's no way to. How can I prove the implicit contract? But it's there. There's no way the Fed said, "Oh yeah, let's just double or triple or quadruple the amount of money in circulation." No way. Oh well, this part he was just a little silly. So he's still arguing in defense of this idea that the banks can have the money, they just don't want it because they can't think of anything to do with it, and they would just put it in their vault and have to pay insurance and buy security guards. When we already know that they could buy equities on the market at any time and just have the Federal Reserve do the transaction. We already know they could just write it on a check. They could buy anything on this planet. They could take their, say one bank has $3 trillion of this shit. It has $3 trillion on its books. It created $3 trillion in friggin' deposits, okay, out of its digits, and it bought stuff. It has the stuff, all right? It does. I mean, we can pretend we have it, but no. If we have it, then they have nothing. Then they have $3 trillion of liabilities, and they're on the verge of bankruptcy because they have a huge liability, and they have absolutely no way they're going to have enough equity in their bank business to pay that huge liability, $3 trillion. But this is preposterous. Obviously, you've made this very argument to me. You've made this very single argument to me that nobody has to transact anything, take the cash and put it in the vault and then do this and do this with the cash. No, none of that has to happen. All I have to do is write a check. The check will go to the Federal Reserve. The money will be taken out of the reserve account. No liabilities, no insurance, none of that crap will happen. They just write a frickin' check for $3 trillion and they buy France. Come on. All right, I mean, saying come on might be the same as saying it's a mature world, you know, so we're just insulting each other, fine. But I'm just saying, how can you, I'm sorry, I don't know, how can you not see that the banks would want the money? That there's no way they want 0.25% interest a year, when inflation is at least 2%, no matter what people say. We know that fuel and the real stuff that matters is definitely going up. So there's no way there aren't better investments in the world to buy than a friggin' bond that pays 0.25%. No, you wouldn't buy that bond. Why would a banker buy it? Really, you would buy a bond that pays 0.25%? You know you wouldn't. Come on. Come on.
It's not a financially viable thing for them to do, so they won't do it.
Well, I think that's just a BS answer. So sorry, that's just a BS answer. I'll be back. All right, I think we got the crux of the disagreement here. Is he's not getting what really happened. Sorry, Nick. In the sense that he thinks that we actually that the transaction was completed. That when we bought the crap off the market, that transaction was somehow completed, and the transaction wasn't completed. The deposit money is still a liability on the bank. So let's say one bank did the whole $4.5 trillion. That one bank has a plus in its column at the Federal Reserve of 4.5 trillion. The rest of the banks have their regular billion here, billion there, billion. The rest of them have nothing. This one bank has it all. It has $4.5 trillion, let's say, in Federal Reserve notes. And what does it have them for? It has them to compensate for the purchases it made. That's what it's for. The money purchased stuff. And the point I'm making is that the whole reason why it's not just printed cash now, the reason why there's still only $1.2 trillion in circulation is because the Federal Reserve money isn't counted as cash in circulation. But as soon as it leaves the Federal Reserve, it'll be new liquidity in circulation, new cash liquidity. And it will buy something. It won't sit in a vault, and you know it. And again, you know that the Federal Reserve, all the bank has to do, it has $4.5 trillion worth of assets in the Federal Reserve. All it writes is a check on its own bank. It buys France. It goes to the check goes to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve takes the money out of the reserve account and gives the bank France. See? See why it can't go out of those accounts? Is because the money can't be released because the money bought the crap. The crap has to be sold to get the money out of the reserve account. The crap. I just don't know if he's going to get... I mean, it's key to understand it's not a completed transaction. And what keeps it an uncompleted transaction is the reserve barrier. When the money leaves the reserves, we know it will not sit in a vault. The banks will not take the money out of the Federal Reserve and put it in a vault. You've made this very argument to me. No bank puts the money in the vault. They put it in the economy. They buy something. They don't let it rot in a vault. I believe I may have made a mistake and didn't hit the button. Yeah, he had a little technical trouble too, ran out of memory or something. So yeah, technical difficulty. So about this money being spent, the banks can't spend the money because it's a liability. We didn't actually finish the transaction. It's not a completed transaction. The bank at any time, if it was really the bank's money, they could just write a check on their own bank, buy France. The check would end up in the Federal Reserve. The money would come out of their reserve account to cash the check. The bank would own France. The bank can't own France because the bank already owns a bunch of junk we bought off the market. It can't spend this money twice. It's already spent the money in the Federal Reserve accounts. It's already bought something with it. That's the truth of it. And it's not money in circulation until the money leaves the reserve accounts. The reserve accounts are just collateralizing a huge, gigantic loan.
But we are talking, billions for each bank. That would be an awful lot of cash. It would cost an awful lot of money to insure.
Again, it's not for each bank, okay? This is only one or two banks that hold all of those Federal Reserve. 95% of the money in the reserve accounts, I'm sure, is only owed to 2 or 3 banks, the ones who bought all the crap, okay? Smith Barney or whatever the fuck it is, Jerkins and Hendricks or whatever, asshole and asswipe, whatever little rickety, rackety bank that the government does its business with, that stole a whole bunch of money from us for the purchases, no doubt. But anyway, that's where all the 95% of the banks have just $40 billion in reserves. Only 2 or 3 banks have $4.5 trillion worth. And if it was their money, they'd buy France with it. They would, and they would just cut wages in half and make a big pile of money.
And to keep secure in the real world, it would be a real big cost for the banks, so they don't do it. And then if you think, well, the banks could spend it.
Yeah.
Well, it'd only go to other banks.
It won't. No. It won't go to other banks. Like I said, not all the bank. This $5 trillion in the reserve accounts is not held by all the banks. It's just a couple of banks have the big giant peak. They own the bulk of the reserves. And those banks can write a check anytime they want and buy anything they want if it was really their money. But it's not really their money. It's already been spent. It bought a bunch of crap off the market. You can't spend the money twice.
And obviously, then you drive the cash down to some other bank, says, you take the cash.
So again, it wouldn't go to some other bank, okay? If I'm one of the guys who owns the $3 trillion worth of these deposit accounts I created, and I have a bunch of junk that I bought, and you're saying the government owns that junk, and so I don't have any liability anymore, I have the Federal Reserve cash, I'll just take that $3 trillion, what the hell? Thank you. 3 trillion new dollars. Okay. And I'll buy France.
Or you buy it off a private.
Like I said, yeah, well, I'm just saying, this is your own argument. If I'm a bank and I have $3 trillion in reserve accounts, I just write a check on my own bank check. I just write it. I pay President of France to give me France. He cashes the check for $3 trillion. The cashed check is in the Federal Reserve. The account money goes from my reserve account to the bank who cashed the check, and that's it. There's no expense, there's no fee, there's no problem. I just buy France.
Person, but they'll obviously then just put it in the bank. It's the same problem. That amount of cash would be in the bank vaults, which would cost them a fortune.
Well, again, there's no way it would be in the bank vaults. It's never been in the bank vaults. We already know that. The banks keep almost no money in the vaults when you really think about it, because they might as well keep it at the Federal Reserve because it's more secure and they don't have to worry about it. So they keep a minimum amount of cash in their vaults. A minimum.
In security, and it wouldn't do them any good. And you think, well, okay, they say, being really tough, we will spend it. So we will spend it on whatever. But don't forget, the bank is a bank, and these reserves are the assets that a bank has.
Right. Well, you're saying they're assets the bank have. They don't have it. They have a $3 trillion. They have a commensurate liability. They have created deposit accounts. They have to own something, so they have to go out and buy something.
For the liabilities that they have, which might be loans that the bank's taken, or more importantly to us, their deposits. Our deposits at banks are backed by assets. One of the assets that the banks have are their reserves. If they go buying my golf clubs off me...
Well, why are you making an example of buying your golf clubs? Why don't you just make an even more logical example? Why don't they just buy U.S. savings bonds at 3%, 10-year notes? That 3% is a hell of a lot better than 0.25%. So why don't they just write a check for $3 trillion worth of U.S. debt at 3%, and at least get some kind of money back?
For cash, then the bank is starting...
I'd say it's a bad investment just because I think, unlike you, the inflation's going to come back hard and heavy.
To look exceptionally stupid because its assets are looking shaky. So you can't just think, well, the banks can spend the money on prostitutes. Because
again, why are you making examples this lame? They could spend the money on fucking Apple stock. They could spend the money on all kinds of... They could buy oil. They could do lots of things with the money. Except piss it away. Obviously, pissing it away wouldn't be a very smart bank policy. Let's buy flowers and decorate the building with flowers. It'll die in a week. Now, I don't think that would be a very good bank investment. I think bankers can do better than that. Bankers can do better than 0.25%.
Prostitutes aren't a very good asset for my deposits at the bank.
Alright, well, anyway, enough of this. We'll wait and see what the next... blah, 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 blah. Running out of time. Alright, only have 4 minutes left, which is disappointing. Anyway, Nick did mention his website, and I'll just post a link in the description. And yeah, I mean, Nick's a smart guy, so he's right most of the time. It's only a couple of these subjects where he just... And they're important subjects, don't get me wrong. I think it'd be really great if he got these foundational stuff right, cornerstones and all. But anyway, so he did some more insulting bits here, blah, 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 religion, blah, 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 blah. But no real argument beyond, I'm right, you're wrong, which isn't an argument. So now he's talking about Milton Friedman and this whole money acceleration thing. And I remember Friedman just because, you know, that was sort of my youth when you're starting to realize you're on planet Earth and you're reading Time Magazine, Newsweek, and Friedman was always being talked about in his bullshit. But one of his ideas was we should borrow, you know, issue a bond and then burn, say, 20% of it. So we'd sell the bond, you know, get money. And instead of spending all the money, the government should just basically burn it. Just write it off. To take money out of circulation, and that would kill inflation. And it's perfectly logical, but obviously nobody wanted to issue more debt because everybody's afraid of debt. But rich people should have known debt is very, very good for rich people. It makes more money for them. Anybody making a debt note, anybody making an IOU, the IOU is going to go into a rich man's pocket. Trust me. So it makes rich people richer when you do that. So you should have known that. But anyway, so we'll play a little bit of this. But I mean, Milton Friedman was an interesting character. You know, but yeah, I thought he was. I liked certain ideas he had. I liked, but yeah, you know, he was one of these flat taxers. He had a lot of theories I thought were just garbage. You know, rubbish. You know, no way to run a railroad. You're just going to make rich people richer. So in some sense, you know, he wasn't a trickle downer, but he was a capitalist whore. Yeah.
That it's not true, because they've got all these reserves, but there's no inflation.
Right. So again, because your argument is that money in the Federal Reserve is money in circulation. My argument is, no, it's quite obviously not money in circulation. It's money that theoretically doesn't even exist until it gets out of the Federal Reserve. And it's not until it goes out of the Federal Reserve and buys something, then it's real money. But till then, it's printed cash that just ain't quite made it off the end of the press. But it's every bit printed cash except falling off the end of the conveyor belt. So it's done everything. It's all printed. It's all ready to go. It just hasn't fallen off the edge. And that's why we're paying 0.25% interest as a token for the fact that leave the money where it is, or else we'll kill you. Something like that. I'm sure the lawyers have that written up.
And when all these reserves were being put in there, let's say, people were going mad about it. It wasn't just Schiff. I mean, it was all over the place that this is going to cause inflation. And the Federal Reserve was putting things out saying that they thought it would help with inflation.
Well, again, reserve accounts are always good for inflation in the sense it's not real money. It's not